Hello, I'm most pleased to be here with you virtually to discuss Frans Hals and two engaging portraits on loan to the Dallas Museum of Art. Thank you, Julian, for the kind invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Frans Hals developed a radical new approach to painting based on unblended brushwork and an emphasis on the appearance of spontaneity and vitality. This innovative style simultaneously crafted a distinctive artistic identity for Hals and vibrant current portraits of his sitters. This talk will explore Hals's style of painting and how it captured the imagination of Dutch clients who actively sought Hals to portray them. In the case of Peter Jacobs in Olycan, the client turned to Hals more than once to record his portrait at different moments in his life. This will also be an opportunity to explore the Olycan family's extensive patronage of Hals over the course of his career. These two paintings of the same sitter, Peter Jacobs and Olycan, were created about a decade apart, in that they are evidence of a shifting style, of a shifting approach to painting. And that is really ultimately what they are about, or at least that's what we'll focus on in this part of the talk, is about how they are evidence of paintings. We cannot be but drawn to the technical brilliance, the dashing evidence of a facile brush moving and sweeping across the surface. Hals took full advantage of the medium of painting and oil, and in the process, as a result of that process, he created the experience of self-consciously mediating our experience through paint. He created paintings that look like paintings and look like they were painted. And as we can see in these two examples of his signature style, paintings that are done in his distinctive manner and that are known and identifiable as by him. To understand what I mean, let's take a step back and think about his stylistic development. Take these two paintings, both from 1625. On the left, a portrait of Jacob Pietersz Olycan, the son of the sitter in Dallas, and the Laughing Boy, also from 1625 in the Maritz house. So two paintings created at the same time, two different genres, one portrait, one a genre or scene of everyday life. In the portrait, we see the really traditional approach to painting that Hals employed early in his career for commissioned works, which was really fine and meticulous. We see, or what we don't see, is unblended brushwork. Instead, we largely see details and evocations, which really give us the difference of textures of the see-through elements of the sleeve versus the embroidered effect of that on the torso, and the particular attention paid to the cuffs and the ruff, all in a naturalistic appearance. In the genre work, by contrast, Hals creates the effects of such elements. Take a look at the collar, for example, which we read as a collar, but really is a series of horizontal strokes of paint slashed across the canvas, or a panel, I should say, in this case. Also, in terms of the hair, where hair is created, where we see wisp and willows of things all over the place, little marks that extend beyond the sense of the head, all with a flurry of activity. In some ways, we could characterize this as tight and controlled versus rough and unblended. And this is a very interesting point. One, right, that Hals can do both styles. Two, he can do them at the same time, which tells us several things. It tells us that he could work in different styles, and he chose when and how to apply them, that there's an intentionality behind his approach. And what we also see that he's able to do, that he's able to experiment with genre painting and look at the different ways of applying paint to canvas and creating different effects than he could in the very formal portraiture, at least at this point in his career. As his career progresses, what we see with Hals is that he applies the experimentation developed in the genre painting to his formal portraits. What do I mean by this? We'll take a look again at the collar of the Laughing Boy from the Maritz house, and then the robe of Peter Olycan on the left. As we see with the collar, if we look in at that robe, which is meant to be a fur-lined cloak. So the passages where the fur is actually a top of white strokes. He's not rendering individual bristles of fur, although you get a sense of that of little jags on the right contour. But the area of the sitters, then the area closest to us, is really just white strokes of paint. And we can read them as such. It is the play and the effect of light and shadow, but it is communicated through unblended brushwork. Similarly, if we look at the contour line around Peter Olycan's shoulder, there on the left-hand part of the screen, we see that it is jabs of marks of black paint that are made to create that sense of an outline. Very similar strokes to the things that we see in the collar on the laughing boy on the right. So he's taking this unblended brushwork, and he's also taking some of the immediacy and the liveliness that is communicated here. Olycan does not have the open mouth, toothy smile that the laughing boy has, but we have through around the eyes and that expression, that look, that piercing glance. That is something that we're getting from the early experimentation as Hals transforms and applies his earlier work in genre painting to his later portraits. This continues even on, and over the course of his career, Hals gets looser, rougher, and rougher and rougher. Here, look at this 10-year later version of the Ringling portrait. And again, I point to the contour, where the contour at Olycan's shoulder are really almost abstracted forms of paint to mark the shoulder. And the garment, too, in that same passage where we see the fur-lined cloak, the white has really just sort of exploded. And if you take that as a cutout, it almost looks like a 1960s abstract expressionist painting or something like this, where it is about the white and the application atop the black rather than the delineation of particular details and forms. If we look at the details of the head as Hals progressed from his 1625 portrait to a 1639 one, we see a very different approach. We see if we focus in on the head, for example, we see not much detail actually in the earlier painting. We have a tight controlled coif, of course, and we have the eyes that are moved to the corner. But if we compare it to how Hals attempted to portray his sitter later, with the hair really extending out as if it has been windblown and is less kempt. But again, it's that expression on the face, where we have a much more personalized approach to the face. Not just the external features, but as if we are being introduced to the inner dialogue that Olycan has. We're getting a sense of a person behind that exterior. How do we see that? Well, we see, for example, that shadow line above Olycan's left eye, which really does so much to wrinkle the brow, bring the eyes closer together, as if he is really sort of contemplating something, where he's looking out at us or something and thinking about what it is that is being portrayed, which has the effect of creating a much more expressive and lively appearance. Perhaps this is seen even more so if we compare Hals to his exact contemporaries. In this case, to Johannes Verspronck in a portrait painted almost at the exact same time, about 1643, now at the MFA in Boston. These were both artists, portraitists more to the point, working in the exact same town at the exact same place. Hals creates his energetic approach to brushwork, his sense of expression, whereas Verspronck is all about still and calm. It is the difference between presenting a person as they existed in a moment to an image of an individual preserved for posterity. Take a look again at the heads. In Verspronck, the facial expression is non-existent, it's blank. The face, too, the coloring is very even. Hals takes a different approach. Here he creates that expression. He animates the eyes through the play of light and shadow. He animates it through the sense of the hair blowing around, magnified by the energy of the brushwork elsewhere, whereas Verspronck chooses a very intensely chooses a very different approach, wherein he locks in his forms and we get no sense of the brush whatsoever. He wipes the edges of it clean so it looks to be a clear, crystalline approach. And these twin features were recognized and appreciated in his own lifetime. Let me take one quotation from Pietersz of 1647, who wrote about Hals that he, quote, excels almost everyone with a superb and uncommon manner of painting, which is uniquely his. His paintings are imbued with such force and vitality that seems to define nature herself with his brush. This is seen in all his portraits, so numerous as to pass belief, which are colored in such a way that they seem to live and breathe. And there are those 2 key points again. That Hals's approach is unique. It is not like Verspronck. It is not like other people practicing before him. And what is it about it? It is about his extreme naturalism, his ability to create a vital, living, breathing appearance. Or to put it differently, it is the living, breathing appearance that makes his approach to portraiture so unique. Another key statement which gives us insight into how Hals will operate and how he was intending to operate comes from the first biography of the artist within a compendium of artists' lives that was published in 1718, so after Hals's death. And the key quotation that I want to pull out here is when Houbraken wrote, quote, "They say it was his custom to lay his portraits on thick and wet, only applying the brushstrokes later with the words, 'Now to give it the master's touch.'" I think we can see those touches throughout these two wonderful paintings on loan to Dallas. Look at this detail here, and we can see all sorts of passages which I think we could call the master's touch. We have the unblended brushstroke, calligraphic handling, which is almost like, distinctive lines that read as nothing but lines. Where, for example, if we get really close to those contours that I mentioned earlier, they read as brushstrokes. They're not meant to be sharp, defined lines that blend in. Instead, they are strokes that we read as perhaps the master's touch. Or if you prefer, the individual smaller jabs of white across the cloak surface, or the swirling, whirling serpentine forms that make the ruff of his collar. All of these are unique and extremely difficult passages, and they stand out exactly because they aren't built in. And I think what Houbraken shows is a way of how not only this is what we value, but that was what was valued in the 17th century by his initial audiences. They loved that his manner was different. They loved that it was so vital, but also that it revealed this technical mastery, this virtuosity that is at the core of what Hals does, and perhaps is what other artists could not do. In conclusion, what this showcases is a very modern way of painting, wherein it is painting about painting. And the other element that I'd like to connect is this idea of the master's touch, self-consciously applied. That it was Hals himself who put it on as the finishing touches, saying to himself or to whoever was watching, "Now I'm applying the master's touch. It is my touch. It is my unique approach. It is something that no one else can do, and it is tied intimately with his own personal ability and individuality, the individuality of his identity as a painter, wherein we get works of art that are distinctively and unmistakably paintings by Frans Hals. In the next section, we will also discuss how this sense of the moment and individuality extends to the individuality of the sitters. As we can enjoy in this marvelous focus exhibition, Frans Hals painted Pieter, Jacobs, and Olycan on two separate occasions about a decade apart. This offers a fascinating window into the functions of portraiture. It also offers entree to exploring deep personal and familial connections between the artist and his sitters. All told, Hals painted members of the Olycan family 19 times. This makes the extended Olycan family one of Hals's most important patrons. Pieter Olycan was a brewer in the city of Haarlem, a city of about 40,000 people, about a half hour outside of Amsterdam. Brewing was an important industry, and being a brewer, owning the brewery, was an important and lucrative business in the Netherlands in the 17th century. Pieter rose to prominence and was a member of the Haarlem Regency, became a magistrate and mayor of Haarlem. He also served in the St. Hadrian Civic Guard between 1627 and 30. This is a civic guard which we think can call a militia group, but in reality, military action never occurred in Haarlem in the 17th century, despite Dutch conflict with the Spanish. But instead, this was an elite social group wherein members of the Regency got together and socialized as something akin to a social club. Here he is being portrayed by another artist about 1630. In the earlier portrait by Hals, it occurs right around the time when Olycan was elected Burgomaster of Haarlem in 1630, which we can tell Hals updated the painting to include the fur-lined cloak, which is the mark of office of the Burgomaster. Indeed, the cloak is painted over the other garment, so we know that it was an important addition, probably encouraged by Olycan to show him in this prestigious role. painting was likely cut down. We're not sure exactly how large it probably was, but the format may have been something more akin to that we see in the 1639 Ringling version of Peter Olycan. In this later version, we also know that there's a pendant portrait. It was quite common. It was Dutch convention for couples to be portrayed together but on separate canvases. And this is indeed what we have here, where Peter Olycan is on the left in the Ringling, and the portrait of his wife, they got separated over time, is now in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. They were married much earlier, and so it does not commemorate their act of marriage. So it asks a question: why would Olycan have two portraits made of himself about 10 years apart? What was their function? We maybe get some answer as we look to a somewhat related case, which is the case of Willem van Hathausen and his portraits by Frans Hals. In 1625, he commissioned Hals to paint a grand, dashing portrait of himself, standing outside in a garden, wielding a sword, like he is a member of the aristocracy. And about a decade later, he employs Hals to picture him in a completely different conception, where he is in an interior space, he holds a riding crop, and is in finery, but he's relaxed. He is so relaxed that he is not only leaning back in his chair, it is about to tip over, a much more intimate conception of the individual, as well as depicting him at an older or more advanced age. But even more curiously, or interestingly, is that Hathausen had this second 1630s portrait updated, copied by Frans Hals almost 20 years later in a painting of almost the exact same size, format, and composition, now in the museum in Brussels. We see some difference in the coloring, which is probably an issue of condition, as well as an updating of the handling, whereas Hals increasingly got rougher or looser with his brushwork over the course of his career. But what we know in this instance is that the 1653 picture can be traced back to the Regent's Room of a Hofje in Haarlem that was founded in 1653. So this is a charitable organization. So it seems that the Brussels picture was a copy of the earlier Hathausen portrait that commemorated his role in the founding of the Hofje. So we have one image presumably for personal use and a second later image for a more official role. Could one of these have been for different types of functions like this, like the Hathausen? Could one have been for an official location in Haarlem? Or if we tweak the question more broadly, could they just have been painted for a different function entirely? Perhaps one of a familial variety. As we can see in this family tree, the Olycan family was extensive and frequently was painted by Frans Hals. Peter and his wife had 6 children, each of them who would have been interested in portraits of their parents, perhaps. What you can see here and what I've delineated and don't have time to show all of is that each of the names in red was portrayed at one point or another by Frans Hals, which goes to this point of 19 separate or individual portrayals of members of the Olycan family by Frans Hals. This is quite unusual to have such deep personal connections to a particular family. The first of these portraits were done about 1625, that of Peter's son Jacob and his new wife Aletta Hanneman. So these are the example of 2 pendant portraits painted to commemorate their marriage, in this case around 1625, executed in the tight, refined manner of Hals at that time. As with his father, Jacob also appears in a group portrait of a civic guard here in this 1627 portrait by Frans Hals. To show another example, we have these 2 pendants that were painted of Peter's daughter, Maria, to her on the occasion of her marriage to Andreas van Hoorn. They were married in 1638. This is 1 year before the Ringling picture. Could this suggest perhaps that the Ringling and its pendant now in the Rijksmuseum could have been intended for the newly married couple? Could they have hung together in their new home? We often assume that portraits are for exactly the individual who was portrayed, but that may not always be the case. To help us think about it, whether they were for Mariah's home or for their own home, that these paintings of both the of those that are hanging in Dallas would have been for a domestic space. This was the age before museums, and they would have, of course, been hanging in somebody's home. To help bring this to the case, as luck would have it, we actually have the home of one of the members of the extended Olycan family in a United States museum. In the Philadelphia Museum of Art, it has this interior space, one of the finest and best preserved 17th century Dutch period rooms in the world. It was acquired in 1928, but the room was originally part of the house in the brewery complex at Shapia that was in Haarlem. And between 1631 and 1639, Agatha Dix and her husband, Nicholas Olycan, operated the brewery and lived in this location. Nicholas was a member of the extended Olycan family. Here you see him as he was portrayed in this group portrait by Frans Hals from 1633. So a home like this is the one in which the portraits on view in Dallas would have hung, either as personal commemorations of important moments of lives of sitters, like rising to the status of burgomaster, or as a reminder of a parent or family member. Also, we have to think about their lives beyond their moment of creation and through inheritance, that these paintings could have hung, perhaps even, at this very room in Philadelphia. Today, we marvel at the paintings as entry points not only to the artistry of Frans Hals, which they are, but they're also entree into the personal, familial, and social network of the 17th century Netherlands. Thank you. These questions are not very idealized. Was that the style of the time, the artist's decision, or the sitters? Great question. It's a combination of all of them. You're absolutely right. If we see, for example, Frans Hals's portrait from the Ringling and compare it to that of his competitor in Haarlem, Johannes Verspronk, we see, in fact, that Hals's portraits are not idealized. To a certain extent, Dutch portraits were pretty naturalistic, but that's a broad statement. Hals's are even less idealized, I would say, than other of his contemporaries. The Verspronk, for example, doesn't show any blemishes of skin or in its even approach to coloring in the face and lack of some of the details that Hals includes. Hals indeed is more unidealized. So that difference, though, doesn't answer the question of attribution. Is it the artist's decision or the sitters? I think there must have been some dialogue and some mutual agreement that they both favored this approach. And indeed, because Hals had a very distinctive approach as a client, if you went and asked Hals to paint your portrait, you would know that you were going to get an unidealized representation. So I think that both the sitter and the artist played a role in that dynamic. Why was the first painting cropped so much? Unfortunately, we don't know. We don't know why. We know that it was. We don't know to what extent. There are many possibilities. One could be that there could have been damage that could have happened at some areas. We know that has happened in some cases. These are very old works of art, of objects, and so there could have been some damage needed to cut off some periods that maybe had water damage or something like that. Another alternative is that there was a different conception of the figure, a later owner really wanted to focus on the face, didn't like as much of the other part. We would think of that very differently today and really would not want to modify the shape or composition, but in earlier periods this happened, including, and the third reason I put out is that sometimes for display reasons, that they had an owner after the moment of its creation, perhaps a couple of 100 years later, didn't have as much space for a full length, 3/4 length portrait, and so really could only accommodate a small group. Sometimes the way they had it in these academy salon style hangs in the interior spaces was almost like a jigsaw puzzle, a tile or mosaic effect where individual pictures needed to rest very closely against each other. And so it was quite common actually for paintings to be cut to fit a smaller space dictated by other things in a person's possession. How can art historians tell that details like the crest on the subject's hand were added later? Another good question. So we look for two things. One, can we see where do the outlines of forms fall? Sometimes you can see, and I don't know whether we can make this out in the details of the slide that I show on the screen, is that we see that the flesh of the hand overlaps the background of the garment. We also see that on the foreground, a few strokes have been tried to make to cover that up, but actually what you see is the edge of the cloak peeking through underneath the fleshy tones of the skin. So it was painted on top. Later, also what we find for Hals is that there's less differentiation in the skin tones. That's a lot of a single block of color there for the hand. We from other passages in the Hals, including here, you can see that he often used shorter, choppier strokes, and we don't see that. So therefore, we would think that it was an addition made later by another artist. So you look for the overlaps of the forms of the lines, which when you get really close, you can see at times. And then the other in the way that the individual forms are created. It's much harder to see in the crest, but that is another, the same basic rules apply. Overlap and specific handling as you would in a handwriting analysis.